Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. D, and in this video I'm going to talk about TIMWOOD. That's T-I-M-W-O-O-D. And you may see this in some lean literature talking about TIMWOOD. Well, what is that exactly? It's not very obvious. Well, TIMWOOD comes from this idea of deadly forms of waste, or muge in Japanese. It's spelled in English M-U-G-E, muge. And TIMWOOD is basically an acronym for these deadly forms of waste. And it looks, again, a lot at building upon Frederick Taylor's principles of scientific management, looking at ways to eliminate waste. So let's start with the first letter of TIMWOOD. That starts with a T. That's transportation. Okay? Transportation means a form of waste where you are moving things way too far from where they're actually going to be consumed. So here's an example of waste. Let's say that, I live in Texas now, and, on one side of the state you have Houston, and on the other side of the state you have El Paso. Well, Houston to El Paso, I'm guessing that's a 9, 10, 11, 12-hour drive depending on traffic. That's really far. So that's an example of transportation. If you produce things in El Paso, and then you've got to drive it 12 hours all the way to Houston, that is time you've got to pay a driver, that's time you've got to pay for fuel, that's 12 hours where you don't actually have the product. So it makes more sense, if possible, to at least reduce that commute, or ideally co-locate your production and your consumption. So, produce and consume in El Paso, or produce and consume in Houston. So that's an example of transportation. And actually one of the pioneers in this field, at least according to Michael Porter, is Walmart, because they redid and revised all their trucking routes so that truckers spent less time on the road and fewer miles traveled, and evidently saved Walmart hundreds of millions of dollars over the past few years in just reducing transportation costs. So the T is a big one. You've got I, that's inventory. Okay? Inventory is a killer, right? You think about why it's a killer. Because you have ordered a product and it comes to your warehouse and it just sits there. Nobody's buying it. So you've tied up your financial capital on goods that just sit in a warehouse somewhere. And by the way, there's also the cost of it just sitting in the warehouse somewhere, right? You've got to pay possibly for electricity to keep the inventory heated or cooled. You've got to pay for the actual infrastructure, the roof, the warehouse, whatever. And of course, when it's an inventory, you will eventually have to pay for somebody to take it out of inventory and deliver it to the consumer. So inventory is a terrible waste of money. And by the way, some inventory degrades, right? Think about foodstuffs in the grocery store. You may have some carrots or milk in inventory, and that stuff will go bad unless a customer buys it before an expiration date. Okay? So that's inventory in action. Again, I'm going to pick on Walmart. They were known for just-in-time inventory originally, right? The idea is that when you buy that roll of toilet paper, they scan it and an order is placed immediately to replenish the piece of toilet paper you've bought. Now, here we are in the 2020s. That appears to be less the case for Walmart, but nonetheless, inventory is a deadly form of waste. Okay? The M in TIMWOOD stands for movement. Okay? Movement. And that's actually like transportation, but it usually pertains to individual workers and their daily tasks. So you think about someone going over to location A, doing something, and then walking all the way back to location B to get it done. Why not locate the two offices where someone's walking back and forth closer together so that the actual movement is less? Or, and again, a famous example is Frank Gilbreth's Science of Bricklaying, which was written in the early 1900s of movement, as well as Taylor with his time motion studies. They looked at, for example, with bricklayers, a lot of times what they would do is they'd go like 20 feet away to grab a brick, and then they'd walk all the way over to the job site. Right? They're walking back and forth all day to lay bricks. Whereas if you just put the bricks right next to where you're actually going to lay the bricks, all you're doing is grabbing a brick and sticking it on. Grabbing a brick and sticking it on. See, I'm moving much more faster with just this versus walking all the way 20 feet and then all the way back. And if you're trying to assess how movement is a form of waste in your own organization, consider drawing a spaghetti diagram. That can actually help you determine these kinds of movements. Now, of course, there's other forms of movement that can be observed, and that's where the study of ergonomics comes into play. Rearranging people's workspaces in such a way that stuff is within easy reach. You can just turn and grab stuff. Again, that can just cut down. And you think, oh, what's 5 seconds here and 5 seconds there? But 5 seconds here, 5 seconds there, over the course of an entire workday makes a big difference. The next form of waste for Tim Wood is a W, and that's for waiting. Waiting is like the scourge of every organization, and we can all relate to that in some way, right? You think about it, you get your form completed, you hand it off to like the accounting or the finance department, and then you wait. You wait for 3 weeks possibly for that paperwork to get processed so that you can get money and then you can pay a vendor or a customer, right? In the meantime, you're not able to get maybe what you need to get done, accomplished, because you're waiting for someone else to do their work, right? So waiting is a huge problem. Now we can assess waiting through things like a bottlenecked analysis or a tact analysis, right? So figuring out where those bottlenecks are and then finding ways to assign additional equipment or additional manpower can reduce waiting. The first O in Tim Wood is overproduction. Overproduction almost kind of relates to inventory. So that means if you think that a customer is going to buy 100 of a certain product and you produce 100, but then they actually only want 50, then suddenly you've got to put the 50 that they didn't order in some sort of an inventory. So it comes on to you to try to accurately forecast demand so that you don't have that inventory and you're not paying all this money to produce something that customers don't actually want. So that's overproduction. Now the second O is overprocessing. Overprocessing means that you put a bunch of bells and whistles on a good or a service that a customer doesn't actually want to pay for, right? So think about, a great example is actually the jitterbug. That's a cell phone designed for the older crowd. Smartphones have a lot of really cool features on them. However, older people, retirees in particular, they don't want all those special features. They don't need the apps, they don't need the WhatsApp, they don't need all those things on their phone. All they care about is maybe having a phone directory, a speaker phone, a call log, some buttons, and maybe a really, really loud speaker on their cell phone. That's all they want. So Jitterbug capitalized on this because these people don't want to pay $600 for a brand new iPhone or $1,000 plus for a brand new iPhone. They're happy with a $50 Jitterbug. That's overprocessing the iPhone for this older crowd. So only add a feature or service to a product if the customer is actually willing to pay $1 premium for it. If not, don't add it and reduce your cost. Reduce your cost of production and possibly also reduce the price to give you that little bit of differentiation advantage. So that's overprocessing. And then the D in Tim Wood stands for defects. Okay? Here's the thing. It is so much cheaper to do something right the first time than it is to produce it with a defect, send it to the customer, have the customer return it to you. You got to throw that one away. Then you got to redo the whole thing again, and you got to get it back to the customer and hope that you haven't lost their business because you produced a defective product. All right? So defects cost a lot more than just the replacement part. It's the waiting time for the customer, it's the shipping back and forth to that customer, and it's the fact that you've got to just redo the whole thing in general. So you're better off spending that extra time, that extra money to make sure that you've done it right the first time, because it's more than double the cost to have to redo it because you have some sort of a defect. Not just in terms of replacing the product, but also shipping that product and in terms of loss of goodwill from your customer and possibly loss of reputation with the industry. So that's Tim Wood in a nutshell. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. As always, hit that like or that thumbs up button if you've enjoyed this video. Definitely hit that subscribe, and if you have any questions, post them in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in another video.